Okay, let's begin. So now we're going to talk about innovation in the ancient world and focus in particular on ancient Rome. So in the first lecture, we talked about the difference between closed innovation and open innovation. Open innovation involves bringing new ideas from outside the organization. And that's an extremely important model of innovation in the past, as well as now and increasingly in the future. And we often think about open innovation. It was expounded and developed as a theory by Henry Cheeseborough, who was originally at MIT, and then they went to California, I believe University of California. And Henry Cheeseborough was saying about open innovation, very important for businesses and so forth. But actually, the concept of open innovation is quite ancient. And ancient Rome can be considered the original open innovator. In fact, one can argue that Alexander the Great was one of the early open innovators. And so this is a picture of an aqueduct, and the Romans were very famous for construction that still survives to this day. And the Romans had several innovations, and this is 10 of those innovations that helped build the Roman world, ancient Rome. And they were concrete, newspapers, welfare, social welfare, bound books, roads, arches, the Julian calendar, Roman law, and battlefield surgery. Now, I highlight Roman law, and the Roman law was known as the Duodecim Tabulae. That's the Latin for the law of the 12 tables. And that was the established Roman law, and it was very unique in that among all the Italian city-states and other urban centers in the ancient world, Rome was one of the few that allowed outsiders to become citizens of Rome. The other cities, the Etruscan state in the north, Sicily, and others in the Italian peninsula, there were many of them, did not have that special Roman law. And the Romans allowed essentially outside people, foreigners, to come in and bring their ideas and to become citizens. So that Roman law was, in a sense, the underpinning for a lot of the other innovation because it allowed for open innovation. And that's very important historically, because here we have Italy, and there were many other city-states here that, as I mentioned, were competing in the time of the Roman Republic, but Rome ended up being ascendant and creating, of course, the widespread Roman Empire. And I would argue that the ability to innovate, and especially military technology, but others too, to create and support that empire was very critical. And what really helped that innovation was a system of open innovation. So I think it was Yata Yokudu was asking, is innovation all about mistakes? How do you make a process for that? Well, one way to make a process for that is to bring different ideas in. And some of those ideas will not fit with the established system, but that will be a new idea. And if it's tested and found to work very well, then it becomes an established idea. So the mistake is not the right word, but differences of ideas is very important. And some of those differences are mistakes, and some of them are planned, but they're planned by bringing diversity of opinion. And that's where open innovation becomes very important, because it enables the diversity of opinion. So as I mentioned, during the period of the foundation of Rome, there was a kingdom here, and there were many other city-states all around here. All these are little cities. and the Etruscans to the north, and Rome and the Samnites just east and west of, south of them, and of course Sicily. There were many different cities, all competing. But why is it? This is a very interesting question. Why is it that Rome ended up being the major one? Through the Republic, which was a conquest of Italy, the Mediterranean Sea, and the empire after the assassination of Julius Caesar and the ascendance of Augustus. So during this time, the Republic had the tabulae duodecim, the 12 tables that created this system for open innovation. And this Latin right in 12 tables were intermediate rights between full citizenship and non-citizenship, allowed Latins to own land, make legally enforceable contracts, and gave people of Latin status to acquire citizenship of another Latin state simply by taking permanent residence there. So a lot of people from all around the Mediterranean and even wider came to Rome and contributed their ideas. So this was the system for open innovation. And so when we move to the second part of the course and talk about methods of innovation, innovation is not just sitting at a desk and dreaming a new idea. There are systems for that. And one of the reasons why the internet is so powerful is it creates a system for more innovation, more ideas to come together. One reason why the printing press was such a powerful innovation is that it enabled the dissemination of ideas. And as we mentioned, that's very important in evolution. More ideas out there mean more innovation. More different ideas mean more innovation. And more ways for those ideas to be tested in the environment mean more innovation. So that's what we talk about here. The three features: hereditability of fitness, so systems that allow ideas to propagate, increase innovation. And then phenotypic variation, systems that allow a variety of ideas will result in more innovation. And then differential fitness, in other words, how those ideas are fitting with the environment. The more we can test those ideas, the more innovation. So this is why the theory of evolution that we spent in biology is so important for business innovation or other innovation. This is going to be, or is the key framework that we will continue to develop in this course. So in particular, the Latin Rite allowed for more phenotypic variation, more different ideas to come in. And that's the essence of open innovation. So finally, we're going to talk about the Renaissance with Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo. So let's talk a little bit about the Renaissance. Everyone talks about Silicon Valley as a model for innovation. And this is an interesting Harvard Business Review article from a few years back. Renaissance Florence was a better model for innovation than Silicon Valley. So they've talked about some features. There was a patronage with the Medici and Michelangelo. So that's kind of like venture capital. There is mentorship, Leonardo da Vinci and Verrocchio. And the concept that potential or the possibility of great accomplishment was more important than necessarily past experience. So Pope Julius II chose Michelangelo for the Sistine Chapel over some more experienced artists. This is very interesting. We live in a very difficult time. You are young people coming of age during a global crisis that I have not seen in my whole life. And they say in history beyond my life. This is a very unusual time with COVID-19. But you might be familiar with the story of Isaac Newton. and Principia, and he wrote his book when he left the university because of the plague in London, and Cambridge University, University of Cambridge. So disaster creates opportunities, and I don't want to make a positive thing out of what is a real tragedy economically and of course medically for people. But the Black Death, which was a big plague in that time, created opportunities. And competition was very important. Leonardo, Michelangelo, all of these artists were competing. And the more you have a competition, friendly competition, that creates more innovation. So seeking out and synthesizing ideas, leadership changing, looking to different cultures, looking to the past for inspiration. So Florence was a great model for innovation. We'll talk about this more in the second half of the course. So let's look at Leonardo da Vinci. Two of you actually mentioned him as an example of a great innovator. And one of the reasons why he can be considered one of the top innovators is he brought many different things, different ideas together. In fact, he's considered perhaps the top person to bring science and art together, true convergence of science and art. And one of the most powerful ways to innovate, which we'll talk about in the second part of the course in more detail, is to bring different areas together. So for example, we talked about composite materials, bringing fibers and the mineral coming together, creating bone. And of course, fiber composites in material science. Steel is a form of bringing things together. But those are pretty close together. They're materials. But if you bring together totally different ideas, that can be a mechanism for innovation. And probably no one in history was better at that than Leonardo da Vinci, bringing together different ideas. So he was a scientist as well as an artist. So some of the features of Leonardo da Vinci that I think are important, I read his biography by Walter Isaacson, of course, some of other works about him. A relentless curiosity, and a very interesting way to see more. In other words, if we look at Alexander Fleming, this is a good example. Alexander Fleming saw the bacteria, he made a mistake, it was dying. Many people would just see that for what it is and throw it out and do a better job of cleaning next time. But Alexander Fleming saw more. And that was one example where he saw more. But Leonardo da Vinci did that almost consistently. He always looked at some object, looked at a person, looked at an object, looked at the human body, looked at nature, looked at animals and plants. He looked at them and somehow he saw more than what was just there. And that's a very key element of inventiveness. And similar to this, he thought bigger. I mean, he would think beyond the immediate implications of that. And related to this convergence of science and art, he made connections between different areas. He also embraced paradox, sort of opposites. Something could be dark, but also light. Some could be heavy, but also not heavy. So he embraced paradox, and we'll talk about examples of that. And he was quite courageous in moving into new areas. So these are features of Leonardo da Vinci's life and work that underpin innovation. So most of you are familiar with the Mona Lisa, of course, and it's a very famous painting that is very distinctive for the way the eyes are in the Mona Lisa. And Leonardo da Vinci has many sketches of how light goes in to the eye and the different properties of the eye as it sees light from different directions. And he tried to recreate these scientific concepts in art. And of course, he did a lot of anatomy as well. So the Mona Lisa takes its artistic value almost more from the scientific aspect than from necessarily the purely technical, artistic aspect with the brushwork and so forth. So the question is, was Leonardo da Vinci truly innovative? And then we were talking about that. And in many ways, he was supremely inventive and creative for those reasons I brought up earlier: creativity, seeing more, seeing bigger, bringing ideas together, making connections, thinking courageously. He was very inventive, but many of his ideas, like the airplane, various military technology, and other artworks, never actually became realized. And in that sense, he was not as innovative as a Bill Gates or a Elon Musk or a Thomas Edison or a Nikola Tesla or a Steve Jobs. And so those individuals might be more innovative. They may not be, but by any means, as creative as Leonardo da Vinci. So I wanted to give this example because from the very beginning, day one of this course, we were learning what innovation really is. And this is a good example. So one of the features of this theory of evolution and theory of innovation, for that matter, is this concept of differential fitness. And differential fitness means you have an idea, good idea, new idea, I should say, new idea, but you don't really know if it's innovation unless you test it with the environment. You test it in the real world. You test it against other ideas. If you sit there at your desk and you say, I have a brilliant new idea, and then you just sit back and just, that's it, and don't talk about it with anybody, don't test it with anything in reality, that's just a new idea, but it's not innovation. So this differential fitness is very important. And a perfect example is Michelangelo. And he was always very competitive, but actually even beyond competition. So this David in Florence was actually considered a very bad piece of marble. It was a big challenge, too difficult to work with. But that sense of competition and exceeding expectations was Michelangelo's personality. The internalization of challenge. And of course, competition to test those ideas. And like Leonardo, he did a detailed study of human cadavers. And after David's statue, took up the challenge of the Sistine Chapel. So if you look at Bill Gates, you look at Steve Jobs, you look at Elon Musk, and you think about what are some of the characteristics of their innovation mindset, they are competitive, but even beyond competitive. They don't even compete necessarily with other business people. They are competing with a higher standard. That is a really, really important concept. So if we combine this concept of differential fitness, the testing of the ideas in the real world, with variation of those ideas, like through open innovation or by convergence of different areas, that's a very powerful mechanism to create innovation. So I gave you these historical examples to start to illustrate and build upon the biology that we talked about of those three factors of differential fitness, phenotypic variation, and hereditability of fitness. So finally, a closing thought. One of my favorite quotes of all time is that of Michelangelo, ancora imparo. And the translation of this is, yet I am learning, or I am always learning. Again, I am learning. And Michelangelo said these words when he was 82 years old. So I want to tell you a little secret. You are the students, I'm the professor, right? But actually, one of the reasons I enjoy teaching is I am always learning. So I update my lectures based on your answers. I think things differently. I'm not always right. You know, somebody says a different answer. It's that variability, right? Uh, for example, one of you mentioned Netflix, and I thought that was interesting. Maybe it's not Reed Hubbard, or I forget the name exactly. I have it in the chat. So I intend afterwards to look that up. I did not know about that. So I learned something. I knew about Netflix, of course, but I didn't know it was one person. So I want to study that, learn something, and maybe in some way my framework will be changed. So my secret is, you're sitting there, you say, I'm the student, I'm learning, but my secret is I'm also learning, because I get inspiration from, I love to do innovation, but I get inspiration from these examples in history, and that's what I want to share with you today. And one of the greatest examples historically, of course, is Michelangelo. And so I would remember that, ancora imparo, yet I am learning. So next week, we will do history of innovation in Korea. I think that's very important. We are based in Korea. There's a lot of innovation has been historically in Korea. And I want to, this is not about Korea being the best or whatever. This is, we want to analyze one specific example in Korea and what are the strengths, weaknesses, and so forth. And so that will be the topic for next week's lecture. So I will give, before the lecture, the very short question that we do for the discussion. I think Mao said he did 200 words. You don't have to do a lot like that. Just answer the question, one sentence, and if you want a little bit of an explanation for your answer, another sentence or two. So these are short assignments for each lecture like we did. And I appreciate you sending those in. And that's it for today. Any questions?
So next time, can you like able